And when you think about mechanical efficiency, your body will burn more calories on movements that it does not feel coordinated with. And the reason why is there is a lot more energy demand from the brain and the nervous system trying to learn how to become more efficient at that. Episode 46, Pursuit of Balance. What's up, everybody? We're going to talk about some programming stuff today and a question that's been brought up a handful of times with this cycle. So for those that are FL members, you guys are going to know this conversation really easily. And for those that are not and just listeners, I'm going to kind of share a little bit more insight so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. So to kind of zoom out real quick to give you guys a quick overview as far as programming and kind of just like thought process behind it. We run 13-week mesocycles, right? Which basically means that we do a 6-week block. We do a part B, which is another 6-week block, which is basically just a progression and a step up from the previous 6 weeks. And then we do a 1-week deload. Deload just kind of being your active recovery, right? So technically the block itself is 13 weeks total, right? And we have 4 of those. So it's 13 times 4. You get your perfect 52 weeks in a year, right? The way that we started doing this about 2-3 years ago is in the beginning of FL's journey, I would always just program, we were doing 6-week blocks, but we were just doing randomly. We would do 6 weeks. We would just we wouldn't have a progressive 6 to the next one and then a deload. And it started obviously evolving and becoming more organized over time. And obviously Glenn and Cisco have been a huge help of allowing me to kind of dial it down and have a little bit more structure behind it. So what we've done the last 2 years is quarter 1 is a powerlifting block, right? So it's a focus around strength development. It's obviously built around the big 3 of your squat, your deadlift, and your bench. And then quarter 2 is more athletic performance. So this is where you're going to see more power movements, more, unilateral training, more technical stuff, a little bit more coordination involved, some sprinting, some sled work, some jumping, some plyometrics. So that's obviously the season that we're in right now. Quarter 3, which is the next one that's starting up in July, will be functional bodybuilding, which is more built around hypertrophy and muscle building. And then quarter 4 is just more the OG kind of traditional style of programming, which is, think about it as just a very well-balanced approach to just training in general, right? So it kind of hits everything that we talk about. It's a balance of strength and conditioning. It's triplanar with the movements. It's got the unilateral focuses. It's got the mobility built into it. It's obviously really kind of centric around compound lifts. So why I frame that for you guys first is I get a lot of people in this cycle specifically that are like, why the hell are we doing these movements, right? And it's a genuine question and it deserves a genuine response and it deserves its own episode, which is why we're going to talk about it today. The question is more around some of these movements of what is the functionality behind this, right? So when you think about goals, and I'm going to kind of segue this conversation into a handful of things. I do want to kind of touch on some of the longevity approaches of training as well. Some of the reasons why I think diversification with your training protocol is also important, and also just the intent of each individual cycle. So quarter 1, the powerlifting focus one, it's built around strength. The goal is to just get stronger. So when you think about the reps are going to be a tad bit lower than normal. Your volume might even be a little bit more or lower. You might get more volume based off sets, not necessarily reps, right? But the goal is basically we want to build muscle. So when we think about the longevity side of things, we think about the health, we think about the natural muscle degradation that happens in our 30s for the rest of our life. We want to be able to combat that, right? Because the muscle is the metabolic machinery that we have. And also when we think about the longevity side of strength and grip strength and the hanging test and all these different tests that are used for longevity purposes, strength is obviously the core part of it, right? On quarter 3, to kind of jump ahead, hypertrophy is more muscle building, right? So the difference between quarter 1 of strength and the difference between quarter 3 of muscle building, hypertrophy is going to be more volume. So you're going to be training in this minimum 6, but 8 to 12, or sometimes up to 15, maybe even sometimes up to 20. So we're adding a lot of volume in the training through the repetitions and sometimes the sets, but not as much as we would do in quarter 1. But that focus is not necessarily getting stronger. You will indirectly, but the focus and the intent behind it is we want to actually get you to build muscle, right? And that's what hypertrophy basically stands for. The athletic performance, and this is why I was kind of bringing up today's episode, these questions that get brought up by clients is okay, what is the functionality behind this? If I am somebody that is training in a current cycle like this, like when you think about box jumps, or you think about an alternating split jerk, or you think about the landmine cleans or the barbell snatches, some of these movements that are a lot more technical by definition, the question is like, what purpose does that serve, right? Is that the best exercise selection for building muscle? And the answer is no. Is that the best exercise selection for maybe building just raw strength? And the answer is no. And we also don't do I would say it's actually pretty split. I was going to say the conditioning is pretty split in quarter 2 and quarter 4. Quarter 1, quarter 3 tends to be a little bit more strength focused or double strength days. So for those that don't know that are listening to this, we have strength and conditioning days, or we have double strength days. Those are kind of like the two structures of days that we choose from when we pick cycles and write them. And the way that we kind of write our cycles is we obviously kind of know what the focus is for the quarter. But when we go to like part 1, the first 6-week block, we basically map out what the Monday through Friday looks like first, right? And we program Monday through Friday. The weekends are up to the coaches that are coaching their own days. So it's different at each location. It's different Saturday and Sunday, and it's also different by class if it's specialties. But we do Monday through Friday, and what we'll do is we map out the structure first. Like, okay, do we want to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, strength and conditioning, and then go Tuesday, Thursday, double strength? And then if we do so, maybe the following 6-week cycle will flip that. So then we go strength and conditioning Tuesday, Thursday, and then double strength Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That would be kind of the outlook for a more balanced cycle. For quarter 1 and quarter 3, the ones that are a little bit more strength focused or muscle building focused, we might get, instead of 3 days of strength and conditioning, it might be 1 or 2 days only, right? It's very rare, but sometimes even we do no days of strength and conditioning. So it's just double strength days only. So the way that it would format is you go through a warm-up, no matter which day it is, on both. You go through a reset, which is what we call relative strength and stability, which is your body weight exercise and your stability exercise pick of the day. And these are also generally going to be aligned into prep for the main strength piece. You will always have a main strength piece no matter what day it is. The thing that's different is basically the fourth section of the workout, which is like, are we going to go into another strength piece, main strength piece of the day? That would be your double strength day. Or are we going to go in a conditioning format or conditioning for the strength and conditioning day? And then we do a cool down, obviously, for both. So I wanted to kind of frame that for everyone first to because this will make the conversation and the rest of the episode make a lot more sense for you guys. So the question of like, why do we do these things if they're not the best thing for muscle building, if they're not the best thing for strength development, is we need to remember that when we think about the longevity side of training, yes, muscle development is important. Yes, having strength is important. Yes, reducing body fat and being in a healthy body fat percentage or a healthy weight, and that's obviously a little subjective because there is a window and it's different per person and per gender. But there's a huge element that a lot of us do forget, which is there is an element of coordination and balance that is required. I wouldn't say required, that is encouraged for you to focus on as you get older, right? We hear this all the time, the famous, like the grandparent that fell over because they didn't have balance, or the grandparent that broke a hip bone when they fell down because they didn't have strong enough bones, which is why bone density and strength training are obviously always a part of the conversation. But the other element of it too, that if you guys were to think about it this way, the nervous system, right? So the brain and the spine and all the nervous system is what controls muscle movements, right? So muscles are voluntary contractions, right? Like the heart isn't involuntary. You don't think about your heart beating. Your heart just does that naturally. So a voluntary contraction happens from a nervous system controlling what the muscles do. And the muscles obviously move the bones, right? So when you think about movement and we think about seeing the skeletal system move around, like muscles are doing that, but nervous system is controlling that. There is a gap between what we call a neuromuscular, right? So when you think about, if I were to give you like a different example, foam rolling is a perfect example. Foam rolling facilitates a neuromuscular facilitation, right? So what that basically means in layman's terms, and of just an elementary version way to explain it, is when you're foam rolling or getting a massage or doing trigger point or doing any type of like applied pressure to a muscle, the nervous system is sensing the pressure, right? And obviously I'm not going to get too into detail why, but with that pressure, the nervous system is basically telling the muscle to relax a little bit, right? So it can reduce the sensitivity towards the pressure and the pain that's happening. And this is where we get better range of motion. This is where we start to feel better. This is where we start to desensitize tissue and reduce pain or the feeling of pain for some people. But that is basically the nervous system kind of controlling the muscle behind that. When I say the gap between coordination is, and I actually might have talked about this when I was talking about the Pinoe episode for the metabolic testing. This is actually a score that is on the active ramp test. And when you think about mechanical efficiency or metabolic efficiency is kind of what they scored at, Think about it this way, and this is kind of an interesting fact. Your body will burn more calories on movements that it does not feel coordinated with, right? And the reason why is there is a lot more energy demand from the brain and the nervous system trying to learn how to become more efficient at that. So if I was a world-class cyclist and I had somebody that's never ridden a bike and we did, I don't know, at 150 watts or whatever, I'll give you a fixed distance. We did a 10-mile run. I would actually burn less calories than the person's that's new to it. And there's a lot of reasons that happen behind that in the physiological side of adaptation that happens from training, right? Or actually our body and the ability for mitochondria density and things like that that happens through training and through aerobic training and et cetera. But also there's a coordination element to it too, right? It might not be as big of a demand on something like riding a bicycle versus doing an Olympic lift or doing something that requires a little bit more coordination, like some single leg exercises or some balance focus exercises or jumping and plyometric type of things. So one of the biggest reasons why I always program it, and even though I don't program it with necessarily the intent that majority of the demographic is necessarily doing this for a sport, if you were somebody that's training for sport, this conversation might feel not necessarily unapplicable to you because obviously it applies in a huge demand because improving your coordination and improving your efficiency is great. Because when you think about sport, and when I say sport, this could be like, am I getting ready for baseball? Am I getting ready for tennis? Or am I getting ready for a triathlon or a marathon, whatever it is? You want to be more efficient because that means that your body is burning less energy in that process, aka allowing you to go longer or faster or harder. Also, the fact that you are more coordinated and are more efficient gives your brain less things to need to focus on because you can kind of get into the flow state of your mechanics in your sport, and allows you to push harder because of that. The thought process not being a huge part of it, right? When someone's brand new to something, like I'll use Olympic lifting as an example. I personally am more pro Olympic lifting than powerlifting, as far as personal just case here, because I just like the coordination aspect. I like the technical aspect of it. I like the mobility demand for it. I like the fact that we get overhead versus powerlifting just being a horizontal press. But I would obviously say the exact opposite for somebody that's just looking for muscle building, strength development, and obviously the less need for technicality. Like there's still technicalities, obviously, with bench press and deadlifts and squats, so don't get me wrong. But for general pop, like I would probably program a lot more squatting and bench pressing and deadlifting. I'd probably say shoulder press versus bench press all the time, just from a functionality perspective, mobility perspective. But it's less technical, right? So it is what I would deem as maybe quote unquote a little less risk, and a little bit more ROI because it's going to be a great way for us to build muscle without so much of the technical aspect. And when I get into Olympic lifting with clients, one of the things that I notice is people are using light weights because we encourage them to do so, but it's not because they don't have the strength. It's because they don't have the technique, right? And that technique takes development, right? Just like any other skill. It doesn't matter if like I'm trying to learn, I'll use golf for me. It's like golf, as I feel for me, is a very technical sport because every club and everything has a different swing, right? So the way that I swing my driver is a little different than the way that I would set up for a chip, right? The way that I swing a chip out of a sand trap is different than the way that I would swing my chip out of a fairway, right? So there's technical pieces, which is aka why I love golf because it is so technical and is such a demand upstairs mentally for me. But over time, when you think about Alzheimer's, you think about dementia. I talked about this maybe a week or two ago about BNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. You talk about mitochondrial density that happens from training. A lot of these things happen from the coordination side, which is why things like gymnastics and things like dance and things that have a lot of coordination are actually good for the brain, right? Not just good for the body. And my biggest focus, obviously, with training is I get a lot of people. I literally just had an assessment yesterday and she signed up for some personal training and she was like, honestly, I like longevity is my big thing. And I was like, well, talk to me about that. She was probably early 30s, maybe 30 on the dot. And, it's funny because like I went through that journey myself where I was always training either for the way I looked or my performance of how strong or fast or whatever my sport I was training for was kind of geared towards. And then as I got older, as I went through a handful of injuries, I was like, okay, don't get me wrong. I still want to look good. It's still very important to me. I still want to have a degree of performance. I want to feel athletic. Like if I want to go play a pickup game of basketball, or if I want to go play golf, or I want to go surfing or snowboarding, I want to be able to use my skill set and my fitness to be able to do so. But when we think about longevity, it's like, okay, well, define longevity. Like what would longevity mean to you when you hear that, right? Is it improving your energy and your mood, right? Is it living a long time and avoiding a disease, right? Is it having the mobility and strength to still be able to use your body through your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, your 90s? Like what does that mean to you? And I think a lot of us, when we hear the word longevity, we think about longevity being length of time here, right? Or length of time of use. And that's where I think fitness can give you a handful of crossroads on your decision of what type of training are you doing, because you need to remember, if longevity is the focus, there needs to be some diversification in your training. Because if you only focus on powerlifting, right? Let's take quarter one for us. If you only make that your focus, you're going to be missing ranges of motion on shoulder health as far as overhead position. You're going to be missing mobility in certain positions just outside of those three movements. Right? It's not going to be necessarily the best thing for building muscle, but it's going to be probably the best thing for building strength, right? Because just raw compound lifts is going to be great. You're not training plyometrics. You're not training speed, right? You're getting strong, but you're not necessarily getting strong and fast. And it doesn't mean that every powerlifter is just strong and slow, but more powerlifters than not are strong and slow versus strong and fast. And that's why I've always liked Olympic lifting, because like when you think about doing a power clean or a clean, I have to deadlift the bar before I clean it. So I'm getting an action of deadlifting and pulling from the floor, but I'm also getting the speed, because now when I go through triple extension, like a deadlift, I'm not getting on my toes. I'm keeping my foot completely grounded. So there's nuance to all these conversations. But why I always like to do the athletic stuff is because I like to remind people that training should not feel one-dimensional. When I was doing bodybuilding, I grew up in a very bodybuilding approach style of training, just because like that's the way my parents train. We do like chest and tries one day, we do back and bis, we do legs, we do push-pull legs is obviously what most of us think about. Then when I started getting into men's physique training, like I was only training for how I looked. I was only training for muscle development and physique. So for me, it was like I always knew that, okay, I needed rounder shoulders. So I would do a lot more lateral raises when I would do my shoulder days, or I would do a lot more rear delt work. My back always had a hard time getting defined when I would cutting down for show. So I always did a lot more volume with my back. I had great lats. I didn't have the greatest mid back. Chest development was always weak for me. So I always had to do a lot more upper chest and incline work. My legs have always been the smallest part of my body when you think about muscle development and just the balance of the physique. So when you're training like that, which is like our quarter three, you're training in a way of how do I look and how do I want my body to be shaped, right? So I get this all the time where it's like guys come in and like, oh, I want to, guys or girls, I want to come in and I want to see my abs, right? Or girls come in and like, I want to build my butts. I want to build my legs. So we all have these different lagging muscles, and that's where bodybuilding is great, because you're allowed to take your training through isolation and take the training intent as this idea of body building, body sculpting. You are just kind of creating your own statue of how you want to look. When you think about athletic performance, yes, being strong for sport is great. Yes, being strong for longevity is important, but also it's like there's an intense amount of speed. There's an intense amount of agility. There's a lot of like plyometrics and coordination and other things that are required to be good. And we see this a lot, right? Like when I was in sports, for example, like one of my strongest skill sets is I was very, very fast and I was very, very agile, right? I didn't really have the best endurance. I was never the strongest one on the team. I always had really, really good coordination. So as far as the skill set for the actual sport itself, I was able to pick up those type of things. So for me, it's like when I think about training, like you can be good at athletics and, sports or whatever the endeavor is without being the strongest one in the room, without having the most amount of muscle, right? And then that's why I like quarter four for me to kind of be a little bit more well-balanced, because I like this diversification, because over the macro of 52 weeks, over the basically over a year, we're kind of getting a little bit of everything. Like, yes, we do want to build muscle. Yes, we do want to build strength. Yes, we do want to build speed and coordination. But specific to this episode, right? Like this episode, I really primarily wanted to focus on why would I take athletic performance training serious as a non-athlete, right? Or for somebody that doesn't necessarily have the goal to use those movements or skills or maybe benefits of that training style for sport or for outside things. And I want to remind that crowd of people that is asking that question that brain health is going to be one of the big things, because improving your coordination, improving your balance, improving your plyometrics, improving your speed and coordination are all going to be things that are going to be great for your longevity over time, because they're not only just training the body, but they're also training the brain. And this is why I like movements like when you think about like a Turkish get up, right? I like to program that in warm-ups every once in a while. And people are like, what does this do? What does holding a kettlebell overhead, starting by laying on my back and then getting overhead do? Well, it's a great way to, it's a litmus test for mobility and stability of how you're feeling. It's going to work on stability. So when you think about mobility and range of motion, a lot of people that work with us have mobility as a huge goal, right? So this girl that I signed up yesterday is a perfect example. One of her goals was like, okay, I want to build muscle, not only just for the aesthetics, but also like for the longevity side of like the health development side, because a lot of people are now seeing all the research and the statistics coming out saying that having more muscle is great for the metabolism, having more muscle is great for longevity, which is great because it's becoming more mainstream. I've obviously been talking about it forever because I work in this industry, but so we're seeing a lot of that, but a lot of people do have mobility, right? Because when you think about mobility, I think that if I were to just give you my guesstimate, more people choose mobility because they want to feel better, because they feel like their posture's gotten worse, or they're having these nagging pains in their shoulders or their neck or their back. And we think that mobility is the fix. And the reality is, there's context to that. Mobility alone is not the fix, right? Understanding what mobility is will make you understand the process that mobility by itself could be the fix. And here's what I mean by that. Most people think mobility is just your range of motion. Flexibility and mobility are two different things, right? Flexibility is the passive ability for a tissue to lengthen. So it's like if you were laying on your back and I grabbed your leg for you and I pushed it as far back as I could, you're going to get a lot farther than you laying on your back and you lifting your leg with your own strength. Why? Because me pushing it for you is A, getting an additional layer of force, right? B, you're completely relaxed. Mobility is you're using your own strength, right? So mobility, the easiest way to explain this to people is mobility is the strength within a range of motion that you have. Flexibility is the passive ability for a tissue to go through a full range of motion, or its full range of motion. Now, when I talk about stability, right, I bring the Turkish get up thing as an example. Why I like to train positions that maybe feel like a little uncoordinated or unstable. Monday, we have alternating split jerks. So in this front rack position, doing like an overhead shoulder press, dip, drive, alternate, and then the alternating split jerk is a split jerk, for those that don't know, is you're basically landing in a split stance. So you're dipping with the bar, you're driving up to the bar, and then you're getting back under the bar and you're catching the bar overhead, but you're landing in a split stance. So right foot forward, left foot back. We're doing an alternating one, right? If I was training an Olympic lifter, would I do alternating split jerks specific to that sport? No. Why? Because their sport demands them being really good at the only side that they would use in competition, because competition for an Olympic lifter is your 1 rep max on a clean and jerk and your 1 rep max on a snatch. So when you get to a jerk, unless you're doing a push jerk or a squat jerk, you're going to catch it in one side only. You're not going to do both sides. But for the sake of our demographic, and myself included, I want to be able to feel coordinated on both sides. There's some cool research that came out, this is a while ago now, that was talking about, even just from like a brain health, dementia, and Alzheimer's kind of prevention kind of case study, that even doing things with your opposite side, right? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried doing this, but like when you're cooking, try cooking with your left hand. When you're brushing your teeth at night, try doing it with your left hand. When I go to walk Kona in the morning, I'll throw the ball with my left hand as much as I throw my ball with my right hand. And I'm going to tell you right now, as much as I've been doing this for years, I still don't feel anywhere as close to my right hand. Like, I feel like I am a newborn when I'm trying to do things with my left hand. So it goes to show you that there's just less neural pathways that exist on our least dominant side, right? And the way that we build these neural pathways is through repetition, right? Like, you will get better. Like, if you only, a good case study for this is always when somebody breaks like an arm or a shoulder or a leg on their dominant side, and they have to use their less dominant side. It's actually great for the development of that side because now they're required to, right? Like, when I do it, it's funny. It's actually, when I go to the park, I'm not joking. Sometimes I'm so embarrassed watching my left hand throw the ball that I will look around to make sure no one's watching me. And that's purely ego because I know that I'm athletic. I can throw the ball really far with my right arm, and I feel very unathletic. And I feel like I can't throw the ball. Not only can I not throw it far, I can't throw it where I'm even aiming. But I do it because I like the coordination development, right? So I bring up this alternating split jerk because I want people to be able to develop that, right? Like not just in the brain side like we're talking about too, but just general coordination. It's important to have that coordination because unfortunately, just like we lose muscle, just like we lose strength, we also lose coordination. We also lose balance. And this is why, when I get some of my older demographic that signs up for the gym, one of the big goals that pops up is I want to improve my balance. And I'm like, okay, well, improving balance basically means that we need to improve stability, right? And coming back to this mobility, stability kind of breakdown, mobility is the strength within a range of motion, like I said. But mobility requires stability around the joints, right? So there's this this is old school kind of theory that's called the joint by joint theory. I don't live by it, but I love a lot of kind of the principles behind it, which is basically that every joint alternates its demands, right? That the ankle has a bigger demand for range of motion than it does stability. Still requires stability, don't get me wrong, but it needs to be able to move in order for you to be agile, to be able to squat deep, etc. The knee has a bigger demand for stability versus mobility. It still needs to be able to move. It needs to be able to flex and extend, open and close, and also a little bit of tibial rotation. But dominantly, the knee wants to be stable, right? Like when you think about most like injuries or ACL injuries, because the knee went too far. It rotated past its range of motion that it should be able to do so. And obviously the knee does not laterally move, right? The hip is a mobile joint, right? It still needs some stability, but it primarily focuses and kind of runs on having range of motion. And the hip is like the shoulder where it has 3 dimensions, right? The ankle and the wrist are very similar, but less of a demand as the ankle and shoulder. So if you notice, it's like ankle's mobile, knee is stable, hip is mobile, lower back is stable, thoracic's mobile, shoulder blade stable, shoulder joint mobile, elbow stable. So we alternate this kind of demand between these joints. That stack is basically what optimizes biomechanics and movement, because when I have stability in between 2 mobile joints, those joints can move better. What happens with a lot of times when we lose mobility or run into injuries is roles reverse. The reason why people have back injuries or knee injuries is sometimes because they're just missing range of motion at their hip, or they're missing range of motion at the thoracic spine and the rib cage and stuff like that. So we kind of have things reverse, and that's where obviously compensation lives. So stability is the foundation to good range of motion. So I always like to remind people of that. So coming back to this athletic performance once again, we train a lot of movements that require you being stable. When you think about force production, when you think about speed, I always used to use this analogy all the time when I was coaching Olympic lifting, that if I were to take a 20-pound brick and throw it as far as I can, and I were to take a 20-pound chain and throw it as far as I can, unless I'm obviously whipping the chains and triple to force, I get it. Don't get physically nerdy on me. But if I were to just grab a bulk of chain, the brick would go farther. Why? Because I'm able to transfer more energy through an object that is stable. The reason why somebody can jump higher or run faster is they have a really, really good ability to create stability and transfer energy and force through that. If you are not stable, if you are not balanced, if you are not strong in those positions, which they're all interconnected, you are not going to be able to jump high or run fast or have good speed development or force development. So that is why it's such an important thing to train, right? Is because you're balancing out the system. One of my biggest focuses with Pursuit of Balance is this entire episode or this podcast name. Functional lifestyles holistically as an approach is very balanced because I don't want to be one-dimensional, right? And the reason why it's fun for me to sometimes knock and talk shit about other training modalities to the other coaches is because I just think it's fun to talk some shit sometimes. But I also like to remind people that my approach to programming in life and health and fitness is open source, meaning I take things that I love from every modality, right? I want to take little things from every bucket. And I want to remove the things that I feel don't have ROI, have too much risk. And when you think about a competitive athlete or somebody that's competitive at anything, at a very high level, you are sacrificing longevity. So if longevity is your focus with training, you need diversification. You need seasons. It's just like anything else in life. Like if you want to be able to work for a very, very long time, you can't go 0 to 100 and stay at 100 forever. You need to have seasons of working hard, and you need to have seasons of resting hard, right? You need to have seasons of training hard. You need to have seasons of recovering hard. This is why we do deload. This is why I don't encourage people to train 7 days a week or 6 days a week, even for some, is we want to find this balance, right? So when you think about the training, just to kind of wrap up today's episode, understand that it might feel like it doesn't have a lot of ROI or carryover to life. And remember, it does. I would never program something that I don't believe is good for the clients, right? I'm not doing things that I wouldn't do myself. I have almost the exact same goals when it comes to fitness as 80% of my clients. Most of my coaches on this team are way more, what would be the term? I don't want to say athletic because I'm very athletic and I would argue that I would be athletic and competitive in a lot of things. I would say more driven towards competition in other sports. So I have some that are doing, ultras now, and some that are doing boxing, and some that are doing marathons, and some that are doing powerlifting, some that want to do Olympic lifting, some that are doing Ironmans, like all these different things. I don't have that motivation in my seasonal life right now where I'm using training for that. I'm using training for longevity. I'm using training to feel better about myself mentally and physically. I'm using training because I have a standard of how I like to look. I'm using training because I have a standard of like the strength and mobility and speed and endurance that I like to have, because I want to be ready for that if I ever had that opportunity. Or I guess created the opportunity for myself would be a better way to say it. So I think about training for most of us is like, I'm in the same boat. So I write programs that I think that I would enjoy doing and that I think clients can benefit from having. But this is the only cycle where I get a little pushback of like, what's the point of this? Like, what's the point of doing an alternate split trick? What's the point of doing a box jump? What's the point of doing running all the time, right? Whatever, right? So I hope that gives you guys some clarity and some information, and maybe a better way to say this is insights to my brain and how I approach training for everybody here, and for myself. And just to kind of wrap up the longevity part of conversation is longevity in your training will come through diversification, right? It will come through proper structure, proper periodization, and proper planning. The beautiful thing about being a member of Functional Lifestyles or other gyms or trainers is like, if they're doing it correctly, is we're taking care of the program. We're taking care of the structure. We'll give you the roadmap. You just got to follow it. You got to trust it. And remember, if you're paying for a professional, the best piece of advice I can give you, I struggle with this a lot, is trust the professional, right? Because we'll do our best. All right, guys. Well, I hope you got some good little nuggets. I'll see you next week.